My guest today is Lisa Gornick. She is out with a brand new, gorgeous book. This is one of those do not miss. It's called The Peacock Feast, and it is, you have a list, you put this on your list. Lisa earned her doctorate in clinical psychology at Yale and is graduate of the writing program at NYU and the psychoanalytic training program at Columbia, where she is also on faculty. For many years, she worked in clinics, hospitals, and private practice as a psychotherapist, a profession she has depicted in various essays as based on sacred trust. She lives in New York City with her husband and her 2 sons and a private sorcery, tinderbox, Louisa Meets Bear are her previous titles, and The Peacock Feast is just beyond a delight. I was thrilled when it arrived, and I'm so excited to share it with you on Reading with Robin. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you, Robin, for that lovely introduction, and I'm really delighted to be here talking with you.
Such a pleasure, and such a bio. Wow. I always love reading these, and I'm like, when do these people sleep? I mean, this is just incredible. And how does all of this, I mean, I can tell because in reading The Peacock Feast, but where do you see all of these pieces of you fitting into your writing and form your writing?
Well, that's a very apt question because I just attended an event at the Columbia Psychoanalytic where I'm still on the faculty where Meg Wolitzer was featured.
Meg.
I do too, to talk about the wife. And one of the analysts there used the characters in the wife as a way of exploring issues about narcissism. And I'm only bringing all of this up because it was so clear that the connections between what novelists do and what analysts do are so deep. It's as though we're really floating in one river.
That must have been a fascinating event to attend. Was Meg there? Was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay, so
she
part
was.
of it. Yeah.
Where they showed parts of the film.
Oh, wow.
It was fabulous. So we had an opportunity there to hear Meg reflect about the way that she creates characters, and it is so similar to the way that therapists and analysts of a dynamic orientation go about learning about their patients. I think the other piece of it is that novelists are always stepping back to look at the shape of things, and I think that's something that the therapists do too, to try to understand what's going on in an interaction, to both be in it and be observing it at the same time.
Which is like the layers of the interaction and the way the story wraps around that. And in reading this, the characters in The Peacock Feast are they're just interesting, fascinating, multidimensional. Everything I love about a character, really reading the story and going, okay, I see why that one acted that way, or, just from everything else in the background of the story and the way the background's actually woven in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was definitely one of my aims, though I have to say that I also love books and writers who are able to create that with saying very little. I think about Elizabeth Strout in My Name is Lucy Barton and Anything is Possible, and Rachel Cusk and Sigrid Nunez, and these are writers I admire deeply, but I also love a big, lush novel, and my goals in this book were more in that traditional vein.
Well, it is a treat, and I know you listen to the podcast, so this is one of those Reading with Robin, treat of a novel alerts, and just the whole storyline. I mean, where did the story start for you?
I just did an email interview with Rebecca McKay, who has
another fan of hers too. Yeah.
Yes. So with her, The Great Believers too, there's this multi-generational saga that stretches also over 50 years, though mine stretches over a century. And one of her questions was, tell me the origin story of this novel. And I just love that phrase, the origin story.
She put it, Rebecca put it so much more eloquently than I. I'm going to make a note. Next time,
either.
ask author for origin. No, I'm teasing you. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure you can steal that phrase from her. And what I love about that phrase, the origin story, is that novels do have origins, and we also have a story about their origins. And the story is probably partially fictive too.
Well, it's the backstory, and I love that because it's either a kernel of something. It could be something somebody said, something you read in the news. I mean, I've heard the most incredible origin stories. We'll now call them from here on in the Mackay rule, and I think that. You can just, by the time you get to the actual story, I love stories. I just love the way we're so connected, and we were talking about that off air, but all of the connections and the way a story just don't always see where it's going. That's the fun of it, not seeing where it loops back.
Exactly. And so I think there is an origin story in that there's usually a kernel of something that sets off a novel, or at least for me. But then there is a story that we kind of weave post facto, a little bit like the way that we construct a story about our childhood. So here's my story about the Peacock Feast. It was a February afternoon, very snowy in New York, and I was wandering through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which I love, and I wandered into an exhibit that somebody had told me about, and I thought, I'm not going to be interested in that, and it was about Louis C. Tiffany, and I always had thought about him in terms of those lampshades, which struck me as kind of kitschy and not something particularly interesting. And once I wandered in, I realized that I had a complete misimpression and misunderstanding of him, that he'd been this vast-ranging artistic genius who had begun as a young man in the late 19th century, not going to college, going off to Europe and then North Africa to study to become a painter. And he was actually a very accomplished painter and showed his work when he, I think, was only 21 or 22. And from there, he went on to become a decorator, part of the early cadre of decorators. He actually was commissioned to decorate the White House for President Chester Arthur in the Presidential Palace in Havana. And he went on, of course, to do his incredible stained glass windows and develop all kinds of techniques for glass. He also didn't give credit to many of the women who did many of his designs, but that's another story. But the origin story for the Peacock Feast came with my seeing a photograph in that exhibit that just stopped me in my tracks, and perhaps it's in the galley that you have. It's the photograph of his Peacock Feast, which was a real event.
That event, yes.
He threw in 1914.
Wow.
And what had happened was that the year before, he'd had this Egyptian fete in his Madison Avenue mansion, and he was not happy with that because some of the workers who he had invited and some of the younger people kind of broke rank, which was that they were supposed to be acting as though they were Egyptian. They stopped acting that way, and they became kind of raucous. So he decided he was going to invite only 150 men of genius to this event, and he commissioned this private train, and he brought them out to his estate, and he curated down to the last detail of the event. But one of the things that he had that was part of this event was a parade of these 5 young women dressed in togas, carrying on top of their shoulders these silver platters with roasted peacocks on them with their feathers reattached. And
as a vegetarian, this is horrifying. But anyway,
it was horrifying.
I mean, it's on many levels, of course, but. Yeah,
you
the women,
the whole thing. For it to be horrifying, and
of course.
It was when I saw that photograph that I became intensely curious about many things, and that's where the book started.
I think it's like these things that we would, whether unless you're researching it or you come across it or you're paying attention, there's so many jewels out there. Who would know? But, this is quite a photograph. And go to lisagornickauthor.com and you'll see this photograph. It's right there, and also you can see where Lisa is going to be. We're very excited to be hosting her at the Point Street Reading Series on February 19th, along with, well, I don't know everybody off the top of my head, Whitney Scherer for sure. It's quite a lineup, and you can go to robincall.com. I never give my own website out. I realize that. But go to robincall.com and click on Point Street Reading Series, and you'll see who's reading on February 19th. But we're really looking forward to hosting you here in Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you. And you can, again, go to lisagornickauthor.com for more information about the book and where Lisa will be. So that just set you up. So it's like if you hadn't gone or visited that part of the museum that day. Isn't that like fascinating? Think about the whole book.
It is. Exactly. The book would never have happened.
It's wild. Those moments always, cause me to pause and think. And sometimes when those moments happen, I think, well, if I hadn't been here or doing this, what else would have happened? I can just be exhausting in my head.
Well, that's true. All the alternate universes.
Right?
I know. Kate Atkinson, I think, has explored that.
Yes. So it's been, yeah.
Why that's right.
That's been done. It's something I fixate on. So there it is. There's the origin story. And in that research, there must have been so much. Is research one of the parts of writing that you most enjoy?
Well, I really did enjoy the research here, and though I felt some anxiety about it too, having had this extensive academic background and doing a doctorate, I knew how responsible one has to be about your sources. So I did spend a lot of time making sure that I could credit all of my sources and I had the facts right. And then there becomes a moment when you have to step back and just leave it all behind because you can't write with note cards in front of you like you would a term paper. So it has to become completely internalized.
Right, and then those are the parts that get woven in, and then do you wind up with just so much that doesn't get used, or that you just, I don't know if you go down the rabbit hole when you're researching, or what do you do with all of this that's been collected in,
Certainly there's a huge amount of the research that doesn't get used. That never bothers me because I feel as though it just becomes part of the fabric of the character, and you don't have to say things for them to be there in the atmosphere. More what got left on the cutting room floor were a lot of characters and subplots that were there in early drafts that were sort of clogging up the narrative, and that I had to let go of, attached as I was to them.
And I'm on the phone with Lisa Gornick. We're talking about her new novel, The Peacock Feast, which is just out, and it is such a tightly told story, and I love the way the chapters are broken down. And was that something that you knew from the start of the story that would be the way it would be organized, or was that something that came as you were writing the story? Or
that I did have to commit to before I began, but though the before I began for me was actually several years in, because I spent several years doing the research and developing the characters and figuring out the themes, during which I was also publishing 2 other books, so this all overlapped.
Oh, wow.
But when I sat down to really do what I call the writing, to begin, I do begin at the beginning and I go all the way through to the end. Now, later drafts may shake things up, but when I write from A to Z. And I had decided on this image for what the structure was going to be, which was in my mind like a braid. There were 3 storylines. One is the contemporary storyline, which takes place in 2013 over a week, with the encounter between Prudence, who's 101, and a great niece she's never known existed, who basically appears at her door, who's 43 and a hospice nurse. And then the other 2 threads are each of their stories. We were talking about backstory and history. Because Prudence, the 101-year-old woman, had lost contact with her brother when he was 14, and her brother is her great-niece's grandfather, I decided that I was going to start that 3rd storyline with when she lost touch with her brother. So it's really, Grace's story is first her grandfather's story, then her father's story, and then hers. So it's these three storylines, and then they ultimately join up to form this, hopefully, one plate.
One amazing plate. And I love multi-generational stories, and I especially love seeing characters' perspective of the things that wouldn't be known in a family, or certainly if the person wasn't somebody that they even knew while they were living, making sense of their own history.
Well, thank you. And that was great fun for me to write Grace's grandfather's story through his point of view, because it would have been very sketchy through Grace's point of view. Who knows the texture of your grandparents' lives? Mm-hmm. Though she does later hear his stories, he tells her his stories, but they're different than what the reader gets to know. So in a way, the reader knows her grandfather better than Grace does.
Yeah. Because, right, what do we really know? And the pieces that when we meet our grandparents at whatever the ages, what came first, what shaped them, where they made decisions they did, what are the secrets? I mean, there's nothing like a great family secret.
The other piece that was very tricky for me to do was that there's a year when Grace lives with her parents. She's later raised by her grandfather. And it's a very momentous year, but of course she's under the age of 1, so she only remembers it, if you could even call it that, right, in these very inchoate ways. But it was an important part of the story, so that is told through her father's point of view that year when she and her twin brother are born on a commune in Northern California. So that's 2 chapters also in the book.
Well, it's just one of those books that you got to read it. You just want to read it, and you just want to. I'm thrilled that people are going to get to meet you when you're here for the Point Street Reading Series. Next week, we'll be seeing you at Point Street Reading Series, and Lisa and I discussed off air, and it will be the second time in Reading with Robin podcast history, but we're going to hear a little bit from Lisa from the beginning of the book and get a flavor of it, and I'm glad you brought that up, too, because I should do more of that. And sometimes that's how those things come about, because I do enjoy it, and I know that the listeners will as well. And so we're going to hear from Lisa, and this is a little bit of the Peacock Feast.
Well, thank you, Robin. As I told you, I was inspired from hearing Jenny Egan read from Manhattan Beach here on book. Reading with Robin, and
I'm so happy. I love it.
I love that. So I'm going to read just 2 pages, and it's actually from the second chapter, which is the first time that we're in 2013. The first chapter is a kind of prologue. So the date is an April Sunday, 2013. At Prudence's age, 3 weeks past her 101st birthday, the phone rarely rings, so that when it does, a little after 2, she is startled, only realizing then that she has slipped into a doze in one of the wingback chairs by the library table where she'd been drinking the Earl Grey tea Maricel leaves in a thermos, always with the strict instruction, Mrs. P., you are not under any circumstances, not even Jesus showing up in his kitchen to light that stove. A section of the paper has slid onto the rug, and as she blinks into awareness, she remembers it is Sunday, Maricel's day off. The phone does not ring most days because nearly everyone she has known is no longer alive. And for those who are, as she witnesses on her outings, she remains a surprisingly strong walker, though she does accede to Maricel's insistence on holding her arm. Talking as a means of communication seems to have fallen out of fashion. Hello, she says, disarmed, as she so often is when she hears her first words of the day, by how like an old recording she sounds, scratchy and faint. Hello, she hears back, a woman's voice, gentle but with a backbone to it. I'm Grace O'Connor. The voice pauses as though aware that Prudence's breath has halted on the inhale. My grandfather, Randall O'Connor, I believe was your brother. Prudence does not blink, as stilled as if she'd met a black bear on a path. She stares at the knobby knuckles of what had once been, she'd been told, lovely hands, at the highway of raised blood vessels visible through her parchment skin. No, thank you, I have no need of that, are the words she hears in her head. I think I'm your great niece. There's no tactile and silly laugh, and with this Prudence senses a grown woman, which makes sense. Her own grandchildren, had she had children, might have been, as she's often calculated, grandparents themselves. But her mind is not making those idle calculations now. Rather, wild, impetuous animal, it has leaped back to the day, a rare pocket of vivid memory when they received the first letter from Randall, then only 14. A letter, it appeared, from the postmark that had taken 3 weeks to travel from his lodgings in San Francisco to Hell's Kitchen. That Randall had written it all had dwarfed the content of the letter, which contained little news save that he was staying with Charlie, a boy he knew from New York, and that he'd found a job as a florist's assistant. After her mother read the single page aloud, her father wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Well, he knows about flowers from me, he said, and her mother sucked her lips into her mouth, holding back. Prudence imagines, go to hell, Eddie. It's because of you, stupid drunk, that he's gone. Her father had not been a stupid drunk, but when he did drink, he could get sloppy and mean, as he had the night Randall left, a night when he'd shoved her mother, and Randall, who boxed at the place around the corner and had a quick right jab, made fists, and her father, who had never hit them, swung at Randall. Grace? Is that what the woman said? I think I'll stop there, Robin.
Oh, okay. I'm lulled. I'm like, listen, you have just such a melodic tone. And, yeah, you were saying and I'm like, oh, we have some more. But this is perfect. People can get a real sense of it. And I just love the way you read. So thank you for offering. And it's funny because I read this quite a while ago, I feel like, but as you were reading it, it just all came back, and I get the book so far ahead that I never remember, and I talk about books and people are like, wait, I didn't see that. I'm like, oh, wait, it's not out. I can't remember timelines.
Yes.
But it all came back to me. It's, just imagining this woman at that age receiving this at the door.
Right.
How you sort of process all that. And, when you're writing that, what were some of the things you were thinking, like seeing somebody and just when you think maybe there are no more surprises at a time, right? What can surprise you at 101 or whatever?
Well, exactly. And, I read about 3 years ago in the Times, I think they were doing a series on centenarians. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that there are many centenarians who are completely independent. I'm not saying they don't have any help. They don't have some help with shopping. They're
doing their day, yeah.
They're very cognitively intact, and Prudence is.
Yeah.
She's a little shaky on her feet, and there are things that are a little fuzzy in her memory, but she's a full person, and mm-hmm. she is also in her own way preparing for her end. The fact that Grace is a hospice nurse allows Grace to be very sensitive to that. But there was also another mystery, which actually I didn't address until many drafts in, when one of my readers said, you have to think about why does Grace come now to see Prudence?
Okay.
Because Grace has been in New York, and she knew she had a great aunt,
mm-hmm.
but Prudence
why
didn't know that she exists. And what happens, the why now, is that her last case as a hospice nurse, she lives in San Francisco, is with a very loving family in which she observes the younger sister Rose of her 88-year-old patient Herman in their last weeks together, and she sees this incredible bond between this 86-year-old woman and her dying 88-year-old brother, and she thinks, what happened with my grandfather and his sister?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how sad it was that they'd lost touch. And so that's what stimulates her to look up Prudence. And it resonates because there are a lot of very intense brother-sister bonds in the book.
Yeah, I like the themes that we see again and again, and that the way they sort of thread through the storylines and their lives, and that's one of the things I love when I read a novel, when that sort of happens. That doesn't happen when the author writes it in, and it's one of my favorite parts of just picking out themes. And certainly, I'm often asked about book clubs, and definitely a book club pick. So much to talk about.
You.
So much to talk about. Just do not recreate the feast. Go to LisaGornickAuthor.com. So is Lisa Gornick taken, I'm going to guess, or did someone else have your name?
Yes, there is. There's
someone
another Lisa Gornick. She is
How dare they?
a film maker and visual artist, and this is very funny. She lives in London.
How interesting. Really?
Yes, she looked me up, and we met in New York. And then when I was in London, I went to the Freud Museum to do a little bit of research. I met her there, and she came out to Hempstead. And
I love that.
I get her mail. Sometimes she gets mine. We send it to each other.
That is so awesome. Is your book tour taking you across the pond or no?
I wish.
Yeah, she would. Lisa Gornick needs to host Lisa Gornick. I think that is fabulous. I love that. Well, it's good to know that your name has a good, domain elsewhere, and it's all good. That's funny. I don't know. That's one of the things.
Well, and our identities are all sort of tangled up. I think sometimes people aren't sure which one of us has done what.
Well, whenever it's great stuff, you just thank you so much. I'm so proud as well. Yes.
Right.
That Lisa Gornick, I love that. And before I let you go, certainly I need to know, what are you reading? We talked about so many books and so many titles at the beginning. What's on your stack?
Oh my goodness! Well, I just read belatedly Sparta by Roxana Robinson, which I just think did not get enough attention. It's magnificent.
Yeah, I love her. Wait, what was the book before that one that I read?
Cost, I think.
Cost. Oh, I love that book. Yes.
And she has a new book coming out, too, with my same editor, Sarah Creighton Books. And
I did not know that. I'll have to check that one out. Thank you for telling me. How did I miss that? Oh, Cost was one of my favorite books, ever.
And I just read The Great Believers, which is amazing, by Rebecca Mackay. Actually, I said her name wrong before.
Okay, and the origin story.
Exactly. And I'm in the middle now of reading a book that was just released about 2 weeks ago by FSG, my publisher, called Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. It's a very slight, spooky, utterly terrifying book.
Ooh, Ghost Wall. I love you have the best
reminds me a little bit of Shirley Jackson.
Ooh, I'm writing that. Ghost Wall. Yeah, speaking of FSG, you have a wonderful team. We adore working with them. They are just so on it and so behind their authors, and it's a pleasure. So I'm glad that you mentioned them, and the heads up on Roxana. Such a huge fan. So we keep good. It sounds like everybody that we mentioned, both on and off, we are absolutely in sync with some of our favorites. So I appreciate.
And I must mention Joan Silver too, whose book Improvement was just one of my favorite books of 2018. And anyone hasn't read that,
I'm reading. That. I did not read that one. Joan Silver, is that also with FSG?
No, that was put out by Counterpoint, but she won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction for that, and the Penn Faulkner. It was
maybe that's why it sounds
lauded.
Familiar. Maybe what? It's very likely, Lisa, that it's here somewhere, and we love working with Counterpoint. So I will check. Probably my daughter will say, we have that book.
It's a quietly brilliant book. I recommend it highly.
Quietly brilliant. That is definitely a recommender. I like that. So we put that one on the list too, Improvement. And we will see you next week here in Providence for the Point Street Reading Series.
Robin.
Really looking forward to it. It is always a treat and such a pleasure to share the Peacock Feast. Check out LisaGornickAuthor.com for more about the Peacock Feast and all of Lisa's work, and enjoy this book. Give yourself a treat, pick it up, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Robin.